Now, according to my star chart, oh no, this this can't be right. It's weirdly specific for astrology. Here we are though. Horoscope. Cancer. You will get caught reading Sandman comics under your desk in a college class, and this will become one of your core memories. Ha ha ha, loser. It's a good thing I don't believe in this stuff.
Hello, friends and enemies, and welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. That was good. Scream again. Ready? Ready? No. Okay, honey. There we go.
And today I want to do Criminali's birth year book tag. I've been watching these videos going around. They're a lot of fun. And so I went back and watched Criminali's original video. And something he said in it was really interesting to me and made me want to do a little twist on this. So here's what I'm going to do. The original questions in the book tag ask about books and movies you've experienced from both your birth year and the year you turned 18. But what he said in the original tag is that he wants to refocus some attention on the books that are kind of fall between recent literature and classic literature. He said kind of mid to late 20th century. I was born in 1992, so I thought that in addition to covering 1992 when I was born and 2010 when I turned 18, I would also cover my mom's birth year and 18th year as a way to actually get some, less recent books into the mix. So, sorry, Mom. I hope that this is fun for you. That was the goal. All right, so got a lot to do here. Let's get started. Question 1. Have you read any books published in the year you were born? If so, what was your favorite and why? Do you have any other favorites? And if you haven't read any birth year books, which do you pledge to read in the next 6 months? We'll start with 1992. Actually, the thing that really inspired me to want to make my own video for this tag was I glanced at kind of 1992 in literature review, and I realized that my favorite Terry Pratchett book was published the year I was born. That would be Small Gods. I'm going to put it up here because I actually listened to it as an audiobook, so I don't have a physical copy to show you. But it is, probably unsurprisingly, a Discworld novel. Almost all of his works are. And, yeah, I've probably only read 6 or 7 Terry Pratchett books, besides Good Omens, which I consider as its own genre, not really a Terry Pratchett book or a Neil Gaiman book, but a book to be held over and above all other works. So, either you agree with me or you're wrong. But as far as Discworld, as a teenager, I read the Tiffany Aching books, which are a young adult Discworld spinoff. I've read Color of Magic, Equal Rights. I've seen some TV adaptations of Discworld novels. By the way, the TV adaptation of The Color of Magic with Sean Astin and Tim Curry is better than the book. Don't at me. So Small Gods follows a young monk named Brutha, which, as you can see, I totally remembered. And Brutha works at a monastery dedicated to the great god Om. Uh, it's one of the most popular local cults, and the region all pays homage to him. Uh, and Brutha is a very simple and straightforward young man who happens to have an eidetic memory. And so he is of great interest to his superiors because his memory is extremely useful to them, but at the same time, they realize that there's only so much they can do with him because he's not clever enough to become a sort of manipulative political player. So this young pawn in training of the cult of the great god Om is gardening one day at the monastery, and he hears muttering from a nearby tortoise, who turns out to be the great god Om trapped in the body of said tortoise. He can't change forms because he doesn't have enough power. Although his religion is massive, very few people genuinely believe in him. Brotha is one of those people, which is why he's one of the few who can actually hear Om's voice. So, this is probably one of the more complex and sensitive treatments of questions of spirituality and religion I've ever read. Over and above, I think, any philosophy book I've read on the subject, easily. It's a very moving book that can speak just as eloquently to a heathen like me or to a religious or spiritual person. It's also very funny, of course. That's Terry Pratchett's whole thing. So, Small Gods, my favorite birth year book, highly recommended. Two of my other favorites from my birth year that I wanted to mention. The fourth arc in Neil Gaiman's Sandman comic series came out in 1992. That's Season of Mists. And it is my second favorite arc in the Sandman series after Doll's House, because having a crush on Rose Walker is a personality trait, thank you very much. Season of Mists is a story about what happens when Lucifer gets bored of running hell and decides to lock up behind him and leave the key for somebody else to inherit. In the realm of dreams, where the main character of the series, Dream, is the Lord, all of the different gods and minor deities, angels, that sort of thing, gather together. You've got Jewish... I would say the angels in this story are a lot more Jewish than Christian, but, you know, Abrahamic angels. You've got chaos demons, you've got old gods, you've got high fae. They all get together to try and sort out who's going to end up running hell from now on. I think that if they were going to make a Sandman movie, and they did consider making a standalone Sandman movie for a number of years. Right now, I think a TV show is in the works, and I can't wait to see, hopefully, just every second of the series faithfully adapted. But if they were going to make a standalone movie based on the Sandman and kind of adapt it for a short format, I think that this arc would probably be the best one for them to do. It's a very focused story, but it has a lot of the expansive world building and just genuine cleverness that Neil Gaiman is so generous with. Would be the best of both worlds. But nobody listens to my advice. Hollywood won't take my calls. Another honorable mention from my birth year, Anne Rice, Tale of the Body Thief. This is the fourth Vampire Chronicles book. It follows Lestat, who makes a foolish deal with a mortal magician who is able to swap their bodies. Lestat has talked a lot about missing being mortal throughout the previous 3 books. And so he makes the deal to swap bodies with this mortal for 24 hours so the mortal can experience being a vampire and he can experience being human again. And of course, as soon as this is done, the mortal runs off with Lestat's extremely powerful godlike vampire body, and Lestat has to chase him to get it back. It's hard to say that any single book in this series is the gayest one of the series, but this might be the gayest one of the series. Highly recommended. Now for my mom's birth year, which was 1965. This turned out to be a very convenient thing for me because my favorite book from 1965 was very easy to pick. It also happens to be tied for my favorite book from one of my favorite authors. And one of the books of his that I was not able to mention in my sci-fi tag video. And that would be God Bless You Mr Rosewater by Kurt Vonnegut. It's one of his few books that doesn't really have a lot of genre elements. It's pretty pure literary fiction. And it is about Elliot Rosewater, the heir to a large East Coast fortune, who leaves his opulent life behind to go slumming amongst the people in his family's hometown that they came from in the 19th century, which is Rosewater, Indiana. It's a literary satire that follows Elliot as he tries to give away as much of his money as possible, and the rest of his family and their lawyers as they try everything in the book to stop him from doing that. It is hilarious and it is extremely touching. If you haven't read this, you've got to read it. It's not that long. As you can see, there's a bookmark in it. That is because this is one of my infinite rereads. I don't know if any of the rest of you have those books that sometimes you're in the mood for, so you just pick it up from wherever you left off the last time you were in the mood for it, and are basically permanently rereading it. I do the same thing with Jane Eyre as well. So, God Bless You Mr Rosewater. Not just my favorite book from 1965, but one of my favorite books of all time. 2 other notable releases from that year. Lloyd Alexander's The Black Cauldron. His Chronicles of Prydain are one of my favorite children's series, really one of my favorite fantasy series in general. As you can see, I collect editions. Here's a rare movie cover. And I don't know that I could pick a favorite Prydain book. That seems like a losing battle. But this is definitely considered the classic from the series, which has 5 books total. It's the one that Disney made a vastly underrated movie of. I stand the Black Cauldron movie. The Horned King is terrifying. Gurgi's adorable. And I think it's one of those really artistically interesting movies that just gets plowed under culturally by the profit motive. Disney never knows when it has a good thing. And then Ariel by Sylvia Plath was released in 1965, posthumously, unfortunately. One of the great classics of poetry. I mean, I'm a sad nerd girl, and like every sad nerd girl, this book is very important to me. So, shout out to Ariel. Now, I have a lot of reading commitments coming up, so I'm not going to pledge to read any certain books, but I will say that I noticed 2 1965 releases that I actually have purchased and are on my TBR, and I will try to read at least one of them in the next 6 months, although I'm not promising anything. One is The Comedians by Graham Greene. I read Brighton Rock, and I really loved it, so I've been meaning to read another Graham Greene book, and I picked this one up at a book sale. And then also Dune was published in 1965, and I've had that sitting on my shelf for a while. I know, read Dune. I'll try. I will. I don't know if it's getting done this year or not, but I'll try. Question 2. Have you read any books published the year you turned 18? If so, what'd you think and why? So we'll start with the year I turned 18, which was 2010. Uh, Really kind of a trash year for culture in general. Just not our best as a society, I think. But there were a few points of light. Suzanne Collins's Mockingjay came out that year, finishing the Hunger Games trilogy. This is technically my least favorite Hunger Games book, but that still puts it leagues above almost every book that's not Hunger Games, so that's not to say it's a bad book. Just that Hunger Games and Catching Fire, and I think even the recent prequel, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, are better. That doesn't mean Mockingjay is bad. I remember actually going to a midnight release party held by an independent bookstore near my college campus. And I vividly remember that one of my dorm mates who went with me insisted that we could not both be Katniss. And so I had to dress up as just kind of an unspecified tribute because only she could be Katniss. Even though we were technically adults, she was extremely insistent on this, and I didn't want to go alone, so that's my memory of this book. Happier memory is the release of Cassandra Clare's Clockwork Angel. I am a lifelong Shadowhunters devotee, and yes, that is also a personality trait. I read City of Bones in 2007, and I've kept up with every single Shadowhunters book she has released since then. I still read them, I still love them, and I think her writing has gotten better with each subsequent book, to the point where I'm a little embarrassed actually now to recommend people start the series, but I still think it's worth getting into. Clockwork Angel is the first in a trilogy set in Victorian London. It was her first departure from the core characters of the Shadowhunter series, Clary and Jace and all of them. This trilogy is still one of the most beloved works of hers, and they're good. They hold up. Why is this such a happy memory? She toured with Holly Black, and I got to hear them both speak. They were wearing matching shoes. It was adorable. I went with my best friend. We had a great time. It's a very happy book for me. Incidentally, Divergent came out in 2011, but because toward the latter half of the year I started working in the independent bookshop I mentioned before, I was able to get an advanced reading copy, and so I believe I did read it in 2010. And while obviously the novelty faded quickly, and I no longer think of that as a particularly good series, it was extremely exciting at the time. It felt, well, not quite fresh, but it felt exciting, and it was also really neat to be one of the first to read it. So I did want to mention that. A slightly better year for publishing was 1983, the year my mom turned 18. That year saw the publication of Roald Dahl's The Witches, which isn't really one of my favorite Roald Dahl books, but I love all of his books, so it's still a winner. The Color of Magic, which was the first Discworld book, so that was a change in fantasy literature forever. Stephen King's Christine, which, while not one of his best, was my first Stephen King book, so that's noteworthy. And David Mamet's play, Glengarry Glen Ross, which would go on to be a much beloved and much memed movie. So I can't really firmly say that any of these are favorites of mine, but they're all important, and I'm glad they exist. This next question is a really interesting one, again geared toward getting people to kind of read older works, and it is, Of the last 10 books you read, were any of them written before you were born? Uh, and I really expected the answer to this to be yes, but I actually looked at my list of recently read books, and my last 10 were all pretty recent. Uh, so the last book I read that was written before I was born was actually Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen by Lili Oakalani. And I read that in December. My Hawaii video is up on this channel. And there was a lot of research for that video, so I read a lot of older books and a lot of things a little outside my wheelhouse. So lately I've been recovering by reading a lot of kind of popcorny recent releases that I've been waiting on. So, no, my last 10 were all fairly new. The next question is about movies. What's your favorite movie from your birth year and why? Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's Dracula. And it's got Winona Ryder. Other notable releases from that year were Aladdin, which was my favorite Disney movie as a small child, although it does not hold up to a rewatch as an adult. I would recommend that if you have nostalgia for that movie, you leave it in the past so you can keep your nostalgia. I tried to rewatch it and I regret it. And Wayne's World, which was absolutely a touchstone of my middle school personality, for worse or for worse. I have to say my mom's birth year was a much more interesting year in film. The number one movie of the year is also one of the number one movies of my life, and that's The Sound of Music. Also one of my mom's favorite movies. It was one of my dad's favorite movies. It's one of my grandma's favorite movies. Everybody loves this movie, and they're right to. It's really good. Julie Andrews is an international treasure. She also wrote one of my favorite children's books, incidentally. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime. But yeah, you know, the human embodiment of love and light. A very dashing, very clever Christopher Plummer. It's just a wonderful watch. Lots of hating on Nazis, which is, I think, one of the few pastimes that brings most Americans together. Most. Love The Sound of Music. Good movie. One of the worst movies of 1965 is also probably the worst Vincent Price movie I've seen yet to date, but I adore Vincent Price. We'll talk about him more at length on this channel at some point. And so I have seen it. I had a lot of fun watching this with my friends in college and goofing off. It's called Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine. I wouldn't say I recommend it, but if it's midnight and everybody is slap happy, it's not the worst thing you can turn on. I also want to give an honorable mention. 1965 was the first year of Doctor Who. So, we've talked about Doctor Who. I like Doctor Who. It's good that it started, although the first Doctor doesn't do it for me. So I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the 1965 movies that are on my watch list that I haven't gotten to yet, even though that's not one of the questions. There's an adaptation of Defoe's Moll Flanders that I didn't even know existed, that apparently was pretty well regarded when it came out, so I'd like to watch that soon. There's a Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing movie, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, that I haven't gotten around to yet. I love Christopher Lee, I love Peter Cushing, and I love Hammer horror. I'm not sure if this was a Hammer film. I think in 1965 it must have been. But either way, I'm definitely going to watch that at some point. And then the French director Agnes Varda came out with Le Bonier in 1965. And I own this, but I haven't watched it yet because I'm a fraud. Uh, this collection of 4 films by Agnes Varda was, at the time I bought it, the only available DVD version of Cleo from 5 to 7, which is one of my favorite movies. But I haven't gotten around to watching the whole set yet. Finally, same question, but about movies the year you turned 18. I've already mentioned 2010 was a trash culture year. Uh, in terms of the big live action blockbusters, we had Iron Man 2, which, although I've been an Iron Man fan since long before the movies came out, I know, but what can you do? I can't change facts. Um, Iron Man 2 was lame. I did see it in theaters, though. The third Twilight movie, Eclipse, came out that year as well. Uh, while I didn't think at the time that Twilight or New Moon were particularly good movies, I was a huge Twilight fan. But Eclipse was the first time that there was a moment that was so bad I actually laughed out loud in the theater, which is when they, spoiler alert for a very old, very popular movie that you've definitely at least heard a little bit about. But they killed a bad guy, a vampire named Victoria, and um, when they split her apart, she kind of cracks open like a geode. It's very silly. Uh, in the book, incidentally, dead vampires are described as sort of resembling stone, but it gives the impression more of a toppled marble statue than just a geode. And listen, all of the production design choices in all of the Twilight movies are uniformly bad. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 also came out in 2010. It's probably my least favorite Harry Potter movie. They're all pretty good, but Deathly Hallows Part 1 is probably the least good. However, 2010 was a pretty solid year for animation. It was around the time when Disney was really looking at permanently switching over from good 2D animation to less good 3D animation, a change which I still generally really disapprove of, but Tangled. Tangled is so good. Tangled is so good, and it really uses 3D animation to its advantage. Uh, I had a friend in college who was an animation major, and we all used to sit together and watch some of her favorite recent movies. She was studying digital animation, so she would really talk us through what was innovative and interesting and well done in the animation, and her high opinion of Tangled really stuck with me. I also think it's a good story. The music's pretty solid. It's not my favorite Disney soundtrack, but I have no objections to it. Mandy Moore's a delight. It's a good one. Rapunzel was also a favorite of mine as a little kid, so. It was also the year of How to Train Your Dragon, which is a joyous experience, and of Megamind. Megamind is just so much better than it has any right to be, and either you've seen it and you know that, or you haven't seen it yet and you'll find out when you watch it. Finally, 1983 in film. Again, this is one where the top film of the year is also my top film of the year. That's Return of the Jedi. I mean, I like every Star Wars movie better than I like almost any other movie, so. Um, it's also the year that Monty Python's The Meaning of Life came out, which I like, although it isn't my favorite. My favorite is Life of Brian, but it is my mom's favorite, and it's a fun one. There were 2 Cronenberg movies that year. The Dead Zone, based on the Stephen King novel, which is not a good movie, but I have seen it, and I did have fun watching it. And Videodrome, which is a good movie that I don't like. Although, Debbie Harry, A plus, no notes. the film version of The Pirates of Penzance, the Gilbert and Sullivan opera that I was obsessed with as a child, came out in 1983. Kevin Kline tried to sing. It was a mess. I love it. And one of my favorite rom-coms of all time, Valley Girl with Nicolas Cage. The soundtrack is so good, you guys. I mean, listen, you know what? No, I don't need to make excuses. Valley Girl is a classic of cinema, and that's my final word. Thanks for tuning in for this. Thanks to Criminali for making the tag. It's a lot of fun. And you're supposed to tag someone for every decade you've been alive, and since I am just short of 30 at this point, that means I need to tag 2 people. So, that's going to be Courtney of Reads and Sips, a delightful channel. She's a wonderful person who I know in real life. Am I breaking the illusion here when am I allowed to say that? And Ashley of Read Now, Sleep Later. So, let's do this, ladies. And just to clarify, I'm not asking you to do the same twist on the tag I did unless you want to. I am tagging you in the original tag as per tag etiquette. But yeah, I can't wait to see what you come up with. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe or whatever, I guess.